and wonders that could only be fully understood by those who had been initiated into the sacred colleges and rites, and that then in these schools the keys were given by means of which these fables were unlocked in all their internal splendor, and man could begin to appreciate the greatness of the things which he had once regarded as frivolous. This remedying of an obvious defect resulting from man outgrowing his own infancy, the great philosophers strenuously attempted to achieve, and they did to a great degree. Gradually the world caught up with them, and these philosophical systems that were once for the few became increasingly significant to the many. Now, this tremendous rise of intellectual rebellion against limitation brought also with it a certain inevitable reaction. We find, for instance, a very interesting thing, that as soon as the public mind began to be highly philosophy conscious, the philosophers gradually became mystics. The leaders departed from this pattern also, and began to emphasize a purely theistic, intuitive approach to deity. It seemed as though they instinctively realized that intellectualism would run the whole thing into the ground, finally. That men substituting mind for God were going to fall onto the horns of another dilemma. They were going to gradually grow great with pride. They were going to worship their own thoughts, and they were going to adore the products of their own mind, and they were going to lose the basic intuitive power which comes only from humility. Thus, even at the beginning, you see the struggle taking form that was finally to emerge. The philosophizing and the revelation of certain great secrets from the temples could no longer be stopped. The breaking down of the mystery institutions, the final dispersing of the priesthoods, the conquering of the areas, the pillaging of the great sanctuaries, scattering their teachers, meant only the inevitable need for the preservation of ideas. And the only way to preserve them was to throw them into the very public mind from which they had once been protected. Because only then could the common man be the keeper of the mystery. Otherwise it would have died with that generation. But no sooner had this occurred than it became obvious that a great danger was also presenting itself. And this probably was the one great surviving, preserving factor that threw a number of these early important leaders into the Christian camp. Here was an important control or directive against the rising of the wisdom principle to the point of mental arrogance. Here was humility. Here was a simple doctrine of human relationships. Here was a simple teaching of the brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God, and do good. Serve, love, have faith, and practice the virtues. This coming into conflict with the revelation of exact knowledge seemingly occurs in pattern, in the mingling of the wisdom of the old mystery systems with the emotional, mystical content which was so present in human nature. And these mingling produced the heresies. They produced the conflicts which mutilated the first 6 centuries of the Christian era. Here then we had the beginning of the schismatic difficulties. We had the wisdom principle and the love or emotion principle drawing apart, trying to build a bridge, each attempting to absorb the other, each determined to preserve itself against absorption, and finally, in many instances, parting as foes, and each going its own way deprived of the most valuable of all factors, that which would have been reconciliation. The bringing of these things together so that we could have had an enlightened love, and we could have had a truly spiritualized, human, idealized wisdom. The dividing of these two groups has never been completely overcome. But the mind, being by nature a dominant and inquisitive instrument, has continued to dominate and has continued to lead man into intellectual segregation ever since that time. Until today, mind dominates practically every attitude and action of the human being. Our Hermetic problem, then, seems to deal with the breakthrough in North Africa of certain secret instructions. We know that the priests of Amun-Ra, those who wrote the rituals of the dead, those who gave the ancient Egyptian Amunism, and later the Osirian religious cult, those who swung their censers before the altars of the great old gods, these priests, with their chants, their rituals, their rites, and their ceremonies, were not the builders of the pyramid. The builders of the pyramid were mathematicians, masters of geometry, deeply versed in astronomy, possessors of exact sciences. These exact sciences, therefore, moved behind the surface of Egyptian religion. And Dr. Preston pointed out that he told me one day that he was convinced that the Egyptian hieroglyphics have at least two different methods of being read. One being a sacerdotal language, a language of priestly process, and the other in some way related to the mystery systems. Dr. Preston was convinced that behind the surface of Egyptian religion was this great wisdom cult, the cult that produced Imhotep, the father of medicine, the cult which made possible the building of these great monuments, and also the gradual regulation of the laws of Egypt, until Egypt became probably one of the most magnificently integrated cultures in the history of antiquity. These things were practical achievements, achievements that could only have arisen from adequate knowledge. The people did not possess that knowledge. The Egyptian lived and died without it. The rulers of Egypt, although initiated into the priesthood, did not always possess it. Actually, it was held by a group, an organization, a secret body of persons. And this secret body perpetuated itself by rites and ceremonies, as described by Plutarch in his Mysteries of Isis and Osiris. This breaking through in Egypt seems to have given us the basic principles of Hermetic philosophy, because these principles deal with certain things, the true nature of deity. The true nature of deity, here interpreted as the eternal mind, which brings all things into existence by the power of thought. Thus, Thoth, thought, Hermes, Mercury, gives us the concept of a world that exists in the divine mind, a projection and manifestation of the eternal thinker. And he tells us that the world is the non-eternal thought of that eternal thinker, that all things are supported on the warp and woof of thought, Thoth, for our word thought comes from his name. This being, therefore, which is the creating power, creates by will, creates by the exercise of secret attributes. This deity is not a highly glorified Louis XVI. This deity is not the Zeus of ancient Greece, nor the Jupiter of the Latins. This is a mystery God, a God without form, of which all things are the form, a God without